Hello. Today I'm just going to walk through very briefly what to look for when editing a note. And in this video, I'm going to provide a pretty brief overview of what I do when I'm editing a note and sort of take you through my editing process as I do it. So this is an old note that I wrote with Wizland, and I'm just going to go through and sort of provide some comments, feedback, and edits on it. So the first thing I want to draw your attention to is this. This is probably the most important part of editing a note, is that you're going to switch from editing mode to suggesting mode. And the reason we do this is because we want to keep the original intent of the author's work, and we don't want to necessarily be changing everything that they have been working on for many weeks or months. The second thing I do is I open up the round of checklists that we've put together. I just find that this is useful to have everything that I need to be editing and need to be looking for in one place, and that I can be checking up on it sort of constantly as I'm moving through the note. Um, and then I'll just kind of go through the note, just read through it. And as I'm reading through it, I'll see what I think needs to be changed and what I think could be worded better and formatted better, and just go through and provide some edits. So the first thing I noticed right away is that there is no author's note. So I'll go through and just say author's note. Okay, just really simple. I like to keep the edits as straightforward as possible and also as brief as possible so they're not taking up too much space. Of course, sometimes it is necessary to write a little paragraph about why you're suggesting an edit, but for the most part, I find it's better to keep it brief. The second thing I notice is that this should actually be italicized in accordance with our citation and style guide. So I'll just add that. And then also the entire abstract should be in italics. So I'll go through and italicize everything, and then also go through and unitalicize the court cases so that they stand out. I'm not going to go through the whole thing and do that, just doing this now so you sort of get the idea of what to look for. And then another thing I noticed too is that note should be capitalized. So I'll just delete the lowercase and add an uppercase N. Another thing I noticed right off the bat is that there are footnotes in the abstract, and that's something that we don't have. So I'll just delete and I'll make a comment, no footnotes in the abstract, reply to that. And then I see it again here, I'll do the same thing. And then I'll go through introduction and just sort of read through that. Right here, I can notice immediately that there's no indentation. So I'll go through and add 5 spaces, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then check to see if it's been properly indented for the rest of the note, and seeing that it hasn't there, it hasn't here, hasn't here. I'm going to assume that this is a mistake that's been made repeatedly. I'm just going to add indent the first line of each paragraph. Apply. And then also I'll go through at the same time and look at footnotes. You don't necessarily have to do it this way. I know that some people prefer to look at footnotes at the very end, but I like to do it this way so that I can see what introductory words perhaps should be used, and which ones are being used and which ones aren't. So the first thing I'll do is I'll actually go to the link itself and just make sure that all the information that's listed is correct. Just because in this, I can see that there's no author, and I just want to make sure that there's no author in the article itself. And as you can see here, there is. So I'm going to add his name to the beginning, give credit where credit is due. Nick Nira, I think, with a comma. And then also seeing that it was published September 25th, 2019, making sure that that's correct, and adding the September 25th information just to keep it as as true to the original document as I can. And then here too, I see that this should be in small caps. This step is optional. If you do decide to do it, you can just go to a small caps generator and write the name of the publication, copy it, and then paste. Okay. And again, this is optional. We're pretty good at catching when small caps are necessary. So if you miss this, or if you sort of just don't want to do it, we're fine with that. We'll do it later in post-production. And then I'll just move on. I'm sort of trying to keep it as brief as I can and not read through everything, but I'm sure if you can see something now that you think isn't correct, I'm sure you're seeing it right, and I'm just moving over it for sake of brevity. Reading through this, let's see. This was something that I noticed too when I was reading through it. To say that the decision or the executive orders were unlawful is very incorrect, considering that executive orders establish legality. So when an executive order is made, that becomes the law. So to say that the executive order or the executive orders are unlawful is just not true. But to say they are unconstitutional is an argument. So I would switch unlawful to unconstitutional, and then add a brief explanation, maybe just say executive orders are legal, or maybe I would say are the law, since I use the word unlawful and not illegal. And then also with this, since I'm citing from this source, which is sort of a summary of this specific appeal, I would also recommend looking at the source again and sort of finding exactly where it's unconstitutional. So I would suggest a colon and then suggest here, like, add additional citation from footnote 11. And immediately when I'm typing this, I sort of don't know how to phrase this in such a way that it makes sense. So as we've said before, it's really important that you're setting up Zoom meetings with the writers to go over this, just so they can ask questions about this, because I'm sure I would have many questions about what this note means. But also I would say in the little description over here, I would say something like, contact me with any questions about this. And then moving on, this is something that I noticed too, is this is sort of a political term, but it is a legal term. This is the official legal language that was used in the US Code section 1158. But since I called the asylum seekers by asylum seekers here, I don't want to change my language to alien without citing the source directly in quotations. So I would make the correction to say asylee, and then in the note I would say keep the language from the previous sentence. And also, if the author, in this case me, were to respond and say, oh, I just wanted to cite the language used in the US Code, then I would say in response to that, cite it directly in quotations, so it doesn't seem like you're bouncing back and forth between definitions, because asylee and alien might be a little bit different, and there might just be that little bit of nuance that you're talking about two different things. Then going through, as I think I said this before, but this was something that has been read by basically the entire editorial board and looks a lot different now than it did when I sent this draft to everyone. And something that someone caught, which I thought was very interesting, was just sort of an issue, I guess, not even an issue, but just a recommendation for better wording and use of legal terms. So here I say the Honduras deal shows us that the perceived rights of asylum seekers are vastly different from their practiced rights. But there's sort of a legal word for both of these words, or legal terms for both of these words. So perceived rights are de jure rights in italics because it's Latin, and practice rights are de facto rights, also in italics. So we're not necessarily asking for you to find edits like these, because this is something that is sort of hyper specific. But if you do pick up on something like this and you say, hey, there's a really good legal term that you can use instead of sort of more casual language, definitely make that recommendation as well. Something else here is that to say how precedent set in this court case will affect the Honduras deal, you don't want to say will, because that sort of implies that this is exactly how things are going to happen. So I would switch this to should. That way it's almost like a way to back off maybe the claim a little bit and to say, well, like, just depending on or looking at the precedent in Trump v. Hawaii, this is what most likely will happen. But instead of saying most likely, saying what should happen, what from your point of view will happen, but again, not stating it as a will, but as a maybe, as a perhaps. And then also here we can see that the indentation is wrong. So I would say delete, and then maybe just as a reminder to add the 5 tabs or the 5 spaces. This right here, this note argues. This is sort of not supposed to be seen outside of the abstract, so I would just delete this. Let me see how to make the sentence work. Although the Honduras deal effectively violates the Immigration and Naturalization Act and ignores the precedent set in the California District Court case East Bay Sanctuary v. Barr, the precedent set in the Supreme Court case Trump v. Hawaii will protect the Honduras deal. So I would just delete all of this and say, maybe not say anything, but if I wanted to provide a reason that I did delete it, I would say this language belongs in the abstract. You don't really want to be making, you don't want to see any allusions to the note. You just want to see the arguments and the facts of the argument. So I'd reply to that. Then scrolling through more, maybe I take this time too to look at all these citations and make sure that they're correct. Seeing here that this would be in small caps, I would fix that, sort of continue through that way. And then also this comma shouldn't be there, so I delete that. Going through, okay. The first 2 sentences of this section. The first sentence sort of establishes the topic of this section, but the second sentence just simply does not belong here. This is background of the case and has nothing to do with the impact of the case. And since this is sort of not even necessarily background information of the case, but rather who was involved in the case, this definitely doesn't belong this late in the document and should have been stated much earlier. So I would just add a comment. I wouldn't delete it because I think this is important information for the document, but I would say cut and paste in the introductory paragraph about the East Bay case. And then commenting, again, I don't want anyone to blindly look through this and sort of just accept all of these suggestions and then delete this when I think that it does belong somewhere in the note. I'm scrolling through some more. This was something that stood out to me too. Actually, this entire sentence. First of all, I thought it was just a little bit oddly worded. To say that the Supreme Court would fail to recognize something, obviously, I don't know. I don't have nearly as much knowledge on the law that the Supreme Court has. So to say that they would fail to realize something is to pretty much vastly overstate my own intelligence in this specific matter and in the legal world in general. So I would pretty explicitly make that comment and say something along the lines of, it's not that they would fail to realize it, they would fail to uphold precedent maybe. But just something to make it a little more specific also, instead of just sort of this broad statement. This is something too, I think this whole sentence needs to be reworked a little bit. So I would keep this comment, but as I'm reading through the rest of it, I would say, okay, maybe to say that the entire asylum process would become contradictory is way too broad. So I'd make that comment. And then I might provide sort of a different approach to the sentence that I would take. That would be something like, the Supreme Court would fail to, maybe, how about this? The Supreme Court would fail to uphold the rights of asylum seekers granted in U.S. Code Section 1158. Because this returns to the original intent of the note, because a lot of this is about U.S. Code Section 1158. So this sort of hyper specifies, again, the content of the note and returns to the original intent instead of making this broad claim that can easily be contradicted. And then moving on, I thought that this sentence, or these two sentences, were just pretty well done. And I think something that you want to make sure you're doing too is when you see like a good analysis, you want to point that out. You don't want to just give all this negative feedback. So I just go through and say, good analysis, a little exclamation point or something, and done. And then, yeah, but maybe not provide too many points like this, but when you see something that is especially well written, just making a note of it, just sort of reinforcing that this is a good note. Then I'll go through here. Again, I don't want to provide too much information. I don't want it to be too long of a video, but something else. Oh, this is a good one. Something else. This should be, since it's a block quote, it should actually be 50 words or more. If it's 49 words or less, it should just be an in-text quote. So because this is 41 words, we are going to maybe just make a comment of this and say, this quote belongs in text. And then moving on, I guess. I think something like this, I think, is more self-explanatory. So it's an easy fix for them to make. They just reformat the note a little bit. And then checking this one, I'm assuming this one's also under, but we'll see. Oh yeah, way under. This quote also belongs in text. Making that comment. And then going through more. At this point too, if I were actually reading through this, I would probably be providing a lot of sort of single word suggestions, just to make the note more specific, make the note flow better, have a better read to it. A lot of times I'll read the note out loud actually. And anytime I feel myself sort of tripping up on a sentence, I'll go through and suggest some edits in this. Something that I'm even noticing now is that this should be capitalized because it's referring to the necessary and proper clause, which is legislation passed by Congress. And since it's a specific legislation, it should be capitalized. And going through too, I like to pay a lot of attention to the conclusion, just because I think that this is when people sort of stop paying, I think, as close attention that they could be paying attention. And I think this is when people, start to get tired and sort of start to slack a little bit, maybe. So I really pay a lot of attention to the conclusion and make sure that it's just a great summary. And obviously, this is the last thing that the reader is going to be reading, and you want it to be really poignant and well done, just to sort of drive the point home. And then also, one more time, I'll go through and I'll look at footnotes, and I'll normally go into sort of like a split screen. So on one hand, I'll have the note, and then on the other, I'll have the citation and style guide. And I normally just have it open to online sources, because that's a lot of what I see cited. But since this is for me at least sort of easy to remember at this point, I sometimes I don't really need to look at this. But yeah, that's pretty much it for what I look for when I'm editing, and what you could be looking for as well. Of course, paying much closer attention to grammar and structural issues than I was, but also, getting as sort of specific as you think is necessary. I know that's sort of a broad claim to make, but really doing your best to catch every little detail that you can. Of course, if you miss some things, we will be able to follow up on them and correct them, but really just doing your best to make sure that the note is as good as it can be when it gets to us.